I'm using as a backdrop an absolutely beautiful picture, just a section of it, by William Cornwallis Harris, painted in the late 1800s, and depicting what was thought to be King Mzilikazi's royal capital, somewhere near the mountains, which I'm going to be talking about in just a moment. Not for certain that that was what it was, but it would be very similar to that. And it sets the scene for what was going on at that time, the Umfekani, as King Mzilikazi was forging through what we knew as the Northern Transvaal and forming a nation in the process, but doing so fairly barbarically and not unlike the Old Testament and what used to happen then. So this is Temba's story about an extraordinary great-grandfather. You would have been killed by Mzilikazi. Temba's jaw dropped in astonishment. What do you mean? Kuda laughed gently. My son, it is good to see things from two sides. If you are writing your scholarship essay about the Matebele, I need to tell you something that will change many things. We were baKwena, the crocodile people. We lived close to what is now Bechuanaland. Once we had big villages with herds of cattle and goats and strong storehouses to keep all our mealies and our rapoko dry. Our village was the biggest and the best of all of them. Temba's eyes shone with interest at this revelation. Our houses were beautiful, Kuda said. They had mud walls with holes about 3 feet wide for light and air. A high, pointy thatch roof with more shallow thatch all round to keep the rain out. The main roof had a hole in the top so the smoke from our cooking fires could get out. Everybody was strong and healthy. The walls were covered in brown, orange, and white patterns. Every year, when the rains were finished, all the women, except those with very young babies, would go up to the hills. They would spend many days looking and looking, collecting special rocks and stones in the bush. Then there was much dancing when they came back. Everyone would show off their stones. Then for a few weeks, the village was noisy with talking and painting and singing. The women used hard rocks to smash those colored stones to powder so they could mix with water. Then, the painting would really start. Kuda smiled, his mind filled with memories of his carefree childhood. He was speaking again. During Mfekane, we had a worrying time. What is Mfekane? Kuda's eyes were deep and unhappy when he looked up. You have a lot to learn, my son. In Zulu, it means the crushing, and describes a terrible time in the history of Southern Africa. It was a time of the killing. The Zulus and the Matebele raided tribe after tribe, destroying their villages and taking their people. In fact, huge areas of Southern Africa had very few people in the 1820s, 1830s. You mean they killed all the people till there was nobody left? I mean exactly that, Kuda nodded. They were either killed or they ran away. It was a time of nation building by Shaka first, then by King Mzilikazi, who was building his new nation, the Matebele. One day, around 1830, there was panic in our village as Mzilikazi's Matebele Impi were coming closer to us. But the king had heard that we were different, that we were an unusual village, in that we had lived in the same place for many generations. He was interested. From a distance, he waited, and he watched, and he learned about using manure and making water run down channels to the mealies. Zilikas himself stayed for many months, asking many questions, and we were happy to welcome him. Kuda gave a wry smile. It was better to welcome him than to fight him. But one night, they were no longer our friends. Temba was horrified. What happened, Baba? When King Zilikas struck, your great-grandfather Motshodi was a young boy who was very lucky to be the fastest runner in the village. He just ran. He was filled with fear, filled with the sounds of slaughter and the cries of the people behind him. He ran and he ran until he found a cave hidden by a tree in the Magalisberg. There he hid and he watched what was happening in the distance, crying in terror at what he saw and he heard. He sat, he watched. He hated the Matebele for their deception. He hated them for their brutality. He vowed he would one day take revenge on them for what they had done. He would never forget. When it was quiet, he went back to find his family. Couldn't find them. There were too many bodies and parts of bodies. He sat on his heels and he cried. He had a roaring come from his stomach. He told me it sounded like a wounded lion. When he was quiet again, he looked up to see small children watching him. 9 boys and girls, the oldest about 5 years. I remember him telling me the oldest could not yet touch his other ear. And that was a way of identifying how old a young boy or child was. If they could touch the other ear with their hand, it signaled that they were about 6 years old and therefore ripe for school. The youngest of these children was a girl, not yet walking. She was crying with tears running down her fat face, crying with no sound because she was so frightened. The children got brave and they moved nearer. He opened his arms and they just huddled together, shaking and sobbing in agony. Your great-grandfather couldn't leave the children, so he helped them to the cave where he had hidden. He kept looking behind to see if they were being followed, wishing the children could move more quickly. He told them they must be quiet, but they were hungry and frightened and crying. He put them near a cave and found water. He filled a gourd and every child had a drink. Then, taking the 2 eldest children, he crept back to the village. They found another 6 crawling and just walking babies and 2 older boys, 17 altogether. So Motshodi took the oldest boy back again with him another time, leaving the oldest girl to look after the rest of the children. The boy was from the second group, and getting near to 9 years, Motshodi had seen that one of the store huts stood a little way away from the rest of the village. Although it was burnt on the outside, it looked safe inside. He knew he might find rapoko and mealies and perhaps some milk inside, and goats maybe. The boy was so frightened, but Motshodi talked to him about courage and made him brave. When they got back to the village, hiding behind some still standing huts, they found the store hut, and your great-grandfather was right. It was full of food. They carried back with them as much as they could to give the children, and some geese followed them all the way, eating as they went, and they dropped the rapoko and the mealies. Motshodi knew the only way to escape was to take the children high into the Magaliesberg. He did not sleep that night. Before the sky grew light, he woke the children. They had to move from the small cave before daylight. He knew about this beautiful valley with clear water, where he and his friend Pinde would come sometimes when they were supposed to be herding cattle or hunting. Pinde was smaller than Motshodi, with golden-colored skin. He didn't live in a village because he was a member of the San. So Motshodi took the children there. He taught them how to get through the rock passage. He told them to help him build some houses from the good thatch grass growing between the rocks. These houses could not be seen from the water. They could be seen only if you went through more passages. Early one morning, there was a terrible honking from the geese. The children fled to their hiding places. Motshodi! Motshodi! A loud whisper echoed round his cave. It was Pinde! 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 The two friends danced and they laughed. The children peeped to see what was happening. Then behind him came Motshodi's two best goats, one called Lololo, because she was always running away, and the other one called Gopo, because he was just a stupid goat and always in trouble. They lived about 3 years in the Magaliesberg Valley, but Motshodi knew he could not look after those children much longer. 2 little babies had died, and the others were getting noisy and careless. Sometimes they even ran out through the veld, right through the rocky entrance, to play near the new royal capital of the Matebele, Nhlanhlandela. But it was too close to the hidden valley in the Magaliesberg. Motshodi came to Pinde and said, I can speak good Sindebele, and I can cut my hair in the Amandebele way. I learned when I was a young boy, and the Matebele were in our village. Can you help me make an azigai? We can kill 2 monkeys from up on those rocks to make my mbechu and find some feathers for my head. Then I will wait till they come back from another raid, and I will hide with them, and they will not know I am there. Motshodi got ready to leave from Nhlanhlandlela. Before he said goodbye, he dressed as an Ndebele warrior, and one of Pinde's sisters shouted, "Ah!" because she did not recognize him. Motshodi lived with the Matebele for many weeks, pretending to be one of the Mashoja captured from another tribe. Then he heard they were going on another raid in 2 days. He also heard them talking about children living in the Magaliesberg. It was definitely time to move. Temba and his father talked until late in the night about this amazing grandfather. Then Kuda said, you might be able to find something out about this grandfather, because he had another name. Why would he have another name? Temba asked. I think he didn't want people to know who he was, because it was a funny name for a grandfather. And when he died, thousands of people came to his funeral. King Kama attended his funeral. So did some important people from the British South Africa Company, and one even came from London. And there was also one of the Boer generals and John Moffat, the British administrator and son of a missionary, Robert Moffat. So they all thought he was something important to them. And you would like me to find out what that something special was, Baba? Kuda nodded. Temba persisted. But to do so, I would need to know this funny name. Kuda looked at this tall, intelligent son of his with pride. If anyone can find out about him, you can, Temba. His name was Jan Grootboom. And he's a man I have been fascinated with, because every time I picked up another bit of research, Jan Grootboom, working with the Mbele, working with the Tswana people, working with roads, working with the Boers. Who on earth was Jan Grootboom? That's the subject of next week's talk. Hope you'll join me there.